The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, we look at Doug Ford's record at protecting Ontario's legacy institutions. Then, Green Party leader Mike Schreiner joins us to discuss how he plans to challenge the PC leader's efforts to three-peat. That's next on the agenda. Ontario Place, the Science Centre, Science North. These iconic sites have attracted visitors from all over the world and helped to shape the province's identity. But in an election where Doug Ford has made the case that only he can protect Ontario from Donald Trump's tariffs, how effective has he been at protecting our own crown jewels? Let's ask. Menon Dworka, president of MPD Culture Consultants. Cynthia Wilkie, founding member and former co-chair of Ontario Place for All. Greg Brady, host of Toronto Today on 640 Toronto. That's an AM radio station, but of course you can get it everywhere now. And Michael Taube, columnist at the National Post, Troy Media, and Looney Politics. And it's great to have you all around our table today for a timely discussion about the state of affairs here in our beloved province. Let's start with you, Cindy, if I can. I don't know if you heard, they're planning to build a spa where Ontario Place is. What do you think of that idea?
Not much, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we suddenly find ourselves facing an existential crisis, both in terms of our economy and our sovereignty, but also our cultural identity. And Ontario Place is part of that identity, as is the Science Centre, as are many other institutions and programs that we have that are dear to our hearts. But I feel that this government is actually eroding the legacy from John Robarts and Bill Davis to create and nurture our identity and institutions that make us distinct and bring us together as Ontarians.
It was Premier John Robarts who made the decision to build Ontario Place because he thought kids ought to have a place to go in the summer in the city, and Bill Davis opened it, I think 1971 or 2 or something like that.
And it was more than a place to play. He actually talked about how it was a place to reflect on who we are as Ontarians and to think about what we have created and what we can bring in the future together.
You're on the radio every day talking to people. What's their reaction to this?
I think two things. I think there's very much, it's risky to have a wait-and-see approach to Ontario Place. I absolutely have phenomenal memories of going to Ontario Place, London kid, come up on a bus on a field trip and to see it and the Cinesphere and the IMAX and then even getting to go to concerts there. Rotating stage, Steve, in the 80s. That was the big thing. And then they built Molson Amphitheater. It's now Bud Stage. I love being down there, but a lot of the bones of Ontario Place needed an overhaul. And I think there are a lot of provincial governments and a lot of Toronto city councils that missed a tremendous opportunity. I'm hoping it can be a balance of public and private. I think there's been economic opportunity, jobs to be created, and we've just missed out on this for decades. But it's tough to take a wait-and-see approach because once it's built, it's built. So I hope it is that private-public mix.
Menon, in your view, what makes the connection between a place like Ontario Place and the people of Ontario? What makes that connection?
Well, I think the primary connection is having the people of Ontario actually inhabit that space and be themselves and actually express their intersectionalities amongst each other.
Of course, they have not been much over the last 15 years or so.
True, but I think of a certain vintage, we carried the memory of Ontario Place deeply within us. I mean, what I think is interesting here about the way we're moving ahead is that I was not aware that we were in a spa shortage, that we had a spa crisis on our hands. I think it's interesting we have two middle-aged candidates running for premier, both women, who have not said that we needed more spas in Ontario.
Crombie and Stiles.
Yes.
They have not said that.
They have not sounded the alarm that we needed more spas. But what we do need is common third spaces, especially after the pandemic. We need places where we can actually express, combine, and realize culture together. And we can't do that if we have to pay an entry fee to be sweating in a steam room.
Michael, what's your view on this?
Look, as the most defined conservative on the panel, obviously I recognize and we recognize, people who are like-minded, that free markets, private enterprise, individual rights and freedoms and things are obviously of grand importance to us, but we have never ignored, as conservatives, historical and cultural institutions at all.
The Conservatives created Ontario Place.
That's right. They created Ontario Place, and the Ontario Science Centre was, as I recall, under the Progressive Conservative government as well.
It was a Robarts government centennial year project.
Exactly. And we have always protected them, no matter what type of conservative has been in power, whether it be John Robarts or Bill Davis or Mike Harris or Doug Ford, the current premier. Now, naturally, I look at things a little bit differently in the sense that the Ontario Science Centre will be moved, it appears, by at least 2028 or thereabouts, give or take. Ontario Place will obviously have a different definition. But I don't have a big issue, as I wrote about in a National Post column, with multi-use buildings and facilities, as long as certain things are maintained and protected. Conservatives believe in protecting those institutions. We don't necessarily go out and go rah, rah, and cheer, cheer for them, but we have never believed in demolishing things. Doug Ford believes in two things typically as a premier. He wants to fix deficiencies and inefficiencies. And if he sees them in place in those two aspects, he's going to look at them. You may not love what he's going to come up with. We'll talk more about it as time goes along.
Let me do that right now because okay, when you talk about will not love it, Ontario's Auditor General looked into all of this, as you know, released a report saying that the development process at Ontario Place was, in the AG's words, not adequately fair, transparent, or accountable. Does that change your view at all about what you just said?
No, not necessarily. I mean, obviously, it's difficult for people to move forward. I've always believed that change is good, and I believe that facilities need to be used properly. As Greg said, I mean, you want to have a balance of public and private in Ontario Place. I'm perfectly fine with that. I may favor the private, but I know what the public obviously wants. It's a question of what goes in and how it works. You know, Therna, the Austrian company, will obviously have its own interest. They'll have a 95-year lease. If it goes through, they will obviously want to attract certain customers. They will obviously need parking in various facilities. They'll need a modern structure. But there is no reason that Ontario Place cannot be still used for purposes that benefit the general public. And I've seen nothing that says otherwise.
Cindy, come on in.
Whoa. Well, first of all, let's talk about demolition. In order to build that spa, the Ontario government has demolished the West Island. The West Island is part of what is integral to the cultural heritage aspect, benefit or beauty of Ontario Place. The architecture, the landscape architecture of Ontario Place, along with the integrated with the buildings and the engineering, is internationally recognized as a rare example of mid-century futuristic design. That's why it is on the World Monument Fund's 2020 watch list for endangered places, endangered cultural assets. And so in order to build the spa, that landscape was entirely leveled. There's nothing there now but dirt. That's the Michael Hoff landscape, celebrated everywhere. How is that preservation? How is that consistent with conservative principles? And then look at what we've got in Ontario Place. It's dominated by two foreign businesses. What used to be something that celebrated Ontario, that invited Ontarians in to an accessible place where they could all, where we could all work and play together and experience Ontario culture. We now have Live Nation, American multinational, and we have an Austrian spa that's replaced a native landscape with palm trees and a tropical landscape. So where's the Ontario?
Okay, let me pick up on that one minute. Does the fact that there are more private interests going to be there in the future, and then doubly so international/foreign private interests, trouble you?
Not necessarily, but I don't see the values of Ontario or even the demographics represented in the GTA in any way expressed in the choice of what the land use is going to be or how it's actually going to be reflective of the culture here. It's just, I hate to say it because people probably think, oh, someone like me would go around saying this all the time, but it's just another example of colonialism. We just import some international fund. We just slap on our blue hat that says we're not for sale, but in fact, apparently we are for sale, right? I'd like us to actually think anyone can come into the pool, but let's celebrate and talk about this uniquely precious group of people that are actually expressing the most defiant form of democracy in North America right now. We should be valuing that.
Greg, your view on that?
Well, I think, again, there's a balancing act. I think did we not have the Toronto Blue Jays owned by a European brewery at some point in time? And I don't think people cared. In fact, that was important land at a point in time where they built Skydome. Right next door is the Ripley's Aquarium. Do families care if it's employing Torontonians and it's giving people a place to go to take their kids to learn about fish and birds and the like? Probably more fish than birds because it's an aquarium, but you get my point. And I'd even point out, Live Nation and that area has created a ton of jobs down there. They're going to make it a 12-month-a-year expansion. I just think, again, this has been all leading up to, I don't love everything about the Ford deal, and I don't love everything about the tax dollars involved, but I don't know the Austrians, if this was Great Wolf Lodge and they were just putting another Great Wolf Lodge in, to your point, there's not a spa shortage, but in the downtown core, you could make the case there is. And there's not. Is there a spa downtown that would be as big as this? So, if we were calling it something else, I think, and let's defend the Austrian Canadians. They've had a really rough ride here. We've had a really tough time with Austrians almost a swear word now in Ontario politics.
Who's writing your material today? You are really funny today. I'm impressed. Well, the opposition leaders have, of course, made a lot of hay about this, and let's hear from them, and then we'll come back and chat. Sheldon, if you would, the clip.
To me, this whole moving the Science Centre was clearly just the Premier's way of padding the Therma project, and so that is not good planning. It's not fair to the people of Ontario. But this is what we see again and again with this government.
From the snap closure of the Ontario Science Centre, to the selling off of Ontario Place, to the Greenbelt giveaway, Ford has consistently put friends first and the people of Ontario last.
Well, I call BS on it. I mean, the government said, oh, hey, we came up with a business case on why we should move the Ontario Science Centre to Ontario Place after they'd already made the decision to do that. So over and over again, the government has misled the people of Ontario about Ontario Science Centre and Ontario Place.
Marat Stiles, Bonnie Crombie, Mike Schreiner in that order. Okay, Michael, do you think these controversies at the Science Centre and at Ontario Place have chipped away at Doug Ford's popularity?
No, and the numbers actually show it. A recent Post-Media Leger poll shows that he's actually going up in popularity week by week. It's quite the opposite.
In spite of this or because of this?
It's not actually related to it because a lot of these things are not top of mind. What is top of mind as of right now is Donald Trump's threat of tariffs. That is what's top of mind. That is what he's primarily made this election about. It's interesting to me, and these are old sparring partners, all of the political leaders, only Mr. Ford's not, although I know him. It's interesting to me they always talk about snap. I wrote about this move in 2023. The switch only occurred in 2024. I've worked in politics. That's not a snap. That's actually done over a period of time. Secondly, it's not going away. There have been some comments in some recent op-eds and columns suggesting that Ontario Place is going to become a parking lot, that the Ontario Science Centre is going to be wiped out, that the two experiences, the groupings that you have where children and adults and their parents can actually go and still celebrate something about it, are not going to exist at some point later on. We don't know a lot of these things, and maybe we should, and maybe we should have a more defined program. I'm not disputing that. But as of right now, I'm willing to stand by the fact that in 2028, there will be something. Not everyone's going to love it, but something will be in place.
Cynthia, do you have to acknowledge that in spite of efforts by groups such as yours and many others, the opposition leaders as well, the Premier's popularity has not been dented by this so far? Would you acknowledge that?
So far, that appears to be annoyingly true.
You're welcome.
But when are people going to, connect those dots? The cultural identity things also go beyond institutions like the Science Centre and Ontario Place. What about our healthcare system? What about our system, our social safety net? All of these things that are being chipped away at by this government. Identity is important the tariff fight and the sovereignty fight right now, or threat right now, is coming from, the terror to the orange terror to the south, who says, we're not really even a country. Well, are we a country or not? Are we going to stand up for Ontario values? Are we going to say that we want to, in places like Ontario Place, show off Ontario innovation? We want to use Ontario materials. We want to have a place where Ontarians can come together without having to pay a big admission fee and enjoy what's unique about Ontario, which might be the edge of the Great Lakes.
But haven't we, you have to say, for 15, 20 years, we just haven't done enough down there. I'd liken it to Navy Pier in Chicago on Lake Michigan, where you've got a great mix of public and private. You want to just go take your own lunch down there? It's beautiful by Lake Michigan. You want to have a fancy dinner on a boat? You can do that as well. You want to ride a Ferris wheel? You can do that, see a concert. Why have we done so badly with Ontario Place? And I get it. I get the preservation angle, but I think Doug Ford has, again, for better or worse, we really can't judge this project until it's over. And I get it. It's too late by then. But don't you think we've just let this sit for too long? There's a lot of, like I said, a lot of premiers, a lot of governments should lay sleepless at night going, I could have done something more than I did with that land.
That's right.
Well, I wouldn't disagree one bit about that, although we were on the path to renewing Ontario Place. So have you been to Trillium Park? It is a beautiful, stunning park.
For those who live outside Toronto, Trillium Park is where?
It's on the edge of Ontario Place. Right. It's about 7 acres of beautifully designed park that evokes the North, evokes, everything that is unique about the physical environment in Ontario. So it's incredibly popular. And the idea was to continue to extend that. And that is what would make more sense to be doing with the West Island of Ontario Place, where people could come and enjoy, enjoy what is emblematic of Ontario.
Michael, you're a Toronto.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
In fact, I don't know whether people, this seems to be part of the, when Doug Ford started this process, there was a lot said about Ontario Place. Nothing happens there, it's dead, nobody goes there. Well, the truth is, in 2018, so the year that he was elected, there were 1.4 million visitors to Ontario Place, not counting the Budweiser stage and Echo Beach. So that rivals the CN Tower. So it is not true that people were not going there. It was a lifesaver during COVID. You can hear over and over again from people about how important it was to be able to go there and walk, run, take their dogs, take their children to a place that was beautiful, safe, and nurturing. So it is really a libel, I think, to say that Ontario Place was not being used.
I think that number's tricky, only in the sense that the CN Tower, you're probably only going to go there once a year. And maybe even you'll go there once every 4. I remember taking my kids there one time, and then that's it. They've seen it. They've seen the CN Tower. We want to have multiple visits to where you're right. You could take a walk, you could take a bike ride, but then you could see a concert. Maybe you want to have people come in and go to the spa. They've built Hotel X down there. That whole area, everything around BMO Field, exhibition, we're just sitting on that land, and it's valuable land that we could be building some element of retail. Again, finding that balance there. Toronto's unemployment rate is close to 10% right now. We have to think about those things as well.
And I wonder, that's the key right there. We need to use it more properly. 1.4 million visitors is nice. It should be higher than that. And there should be more to it than that. We always get stuck on this, and you're reminding me a little bit, I'm not being mean, of Mel Hertig in the National Party. I'm thinking that we only look at things in a particular way. This is the way it's set up. This is the way it's done. We can't look at anything else. Progress has to happen, and we have to use our space wisely. The Ontario Science Centre is a classic one. Went to it many times. We had membership for my son many, many years. Everyone was saying, well, look, the report came out. It only says that 4 to 6% of the roofs are having problems. Let's just fix the roofs and it gets better. My family's been involved in mortgage investments for over a century. Let me say that when it starts at 4 to 6%, even if you fix it, it's going to get worse. Everyone on the left and the right agreed that the building, which obviously had some practical purpose, was getting old, was getting stale, needed to be improved. I wandered through it. It really did. Ontario Place, lovely. No one questions that. I don't naturally go to it anymore. I went to it more when I was younger. Why? Because it hasn't been used properly for years.
Yeah.
It's fine to say how wonderful it is and that we have the native park here and that we have our historical landmark there. All very important, all very relevant. I love history, I love politics. That's what I studied most of my life. It has to be used wisely.
Okay,
and whether you like it or not, it's not right now.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is that it's clear that Ontario Place had a mission and a purpose. And when I think about public-private partnerships, why does it have to nudge off balance the mission of the thing? Can't a private company come in and say, hey, we can do this better, this mission? And for me, this seems like where I'm worried about judging at the end.
Yeah.
Because we can't. But if someone said, hey, I can do your original mission better with more money, more capital, more jobs, who would not be for that?
Exactly.
Let me keep this with you, because we are in the middle of an election campaign right now, and some people are going to be comparing and contrasting what the parties have to say about our crown jewels, as we're calling them here. You do a lot of work with museums and galleries, and you have followed their path through various governments over the years. So tell us, the Art Gallery of Ontario, Science North, the Ontario Science Centre, the Royal Ontario Museum, the list goes on, Art Gallery of Hamilton. Mm-hmm. How has this government done, relatively speaking, protecting our crown jewels?
Well, I mean, I might start in a different place with cutting back from the Ontario Arts Council, a $5 million cut, which it doesn't seem like a lot, but to the artists, and I always like to think of these grants as investments rather than expenditures, right? If you don't give project grants, if you don't give operating grants, we don't have an ecosystem, and then the folks that can pop out the other end that are world recognized and draw people to Ontario,
I get you.
right?
But crown jewels, let's focus on the crown jewels.
So ROM, I think I'm doing 2 searches with the ROM right now. They've got an incredible strategic plan called Open ROM. They're hiring up like crazy. I helped place their Indigenous curator that's in there right now. I think they're doing everything they can. Obviously, they can be better resourced, but I think the people of Ontario are going to have to demand whether they want. I think here's the central problem. Our cultural institutions have objects from all over the planet, which is great. We can all gawk at these things, and we can see them now on our phones. But for someone to connect the dots between those objects and how we interact on the street, at work, that is going to cost money.
But what I don't hear you saying, Menon, I don't hear you saying Doug Ford, the barbarian, has brought an end to all of our cultural beautiful spots in this province and ought to be thrown out for that reason.
Yeah, I don't feel that.
You don't feel that way?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
I know I'd probably be better for the panel if I said.
No,
yeah,
I'm just...
I'm quite happy to hear it. That's
yeah. I will say that I think, to your point earlier,
Sure.
that culture spending has always gone up federally under conservative governments. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. Yeah. And I'm pretty agnostic on who's sitting in the seat. As long as the money's going up and people acknowledge there is a thing called Canadian culture and we need to finance it, whether it's private or public funding, I'm all for that.
Greg, tell me, again, on the issue of what people are talking about right now, we're talking about these places that a lot of Ontarians go to on an annual basis or every other year, whatever. But affordability, healthcare, education seem to be the things that they are talking about most during this election campaign. If you had to rate this issue, where is it in the panoply?
It's hard to swing a vote. It's hard to swing a vote just based on this stuff. Like, I will tell you, the Science Center, especially for the location, rips me up. We have a lot of teachers and educators that text the show. I'm out in Ajax in Durham region. The zoo's really important because it's close by. I don't want to see anything happen to that zoo. It could be called the Scarborough Zoo, but it's the Toronto Metro Zoo. The Science Centre was a wonderful location to be able to get to from north of Toronto and across that sort of, coming east-west from the east part of the 401. So I go back to Menon's point. There's always been also corporate support for the arts. You can't go into the ROM and you can't go into any museum anywhere and not see this exhibit sponsored by, now it could be Budweiser, or maybe I'm thirsty, I don't know. But remember that, I'm a rock and roll guy, there used to be such consternation about, oh my goodness, this tour of this band is sponsored by this beer. And it's like, the art should be so unique. We know there has to be that mix of public and private. Again, it's just going to be that balancing act. So some of it has to be city money, but you rely on corporate support if you're an art gallery. You rely on donors, like to a university almost, to keep contributing. You can't survive on memberships alone.
Cynthia's organization, Ontario Place for All, put this tweet out. Do we still call it a tweet even though it's X?
Well, it's an
Yes.
ex-post.
It's an ex-post, okay.
We still
enough.
call it tweets.
You do, okay.
We're
So
not
if you want to
going
put
to
this up, here's what Ontario Place for All put out there. Choose an Ontario-made product, Ford says. We were asking him all along to do that at Ontario Place. Not too late to change course. All right. Under the threat of a trade war, do you think people are going to be more eager to keep our public institutions, if I can put it this way, as Ontario as possible?
Well, I think we're already seeing that. Aren't we seeing grocery stores are now putting up signs saying made in, or grown in Canada?
Canadian
This is
made, yes.
Canadian made.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things about the original build of Ontario Place was Robarts and Davis were very proud to say every bit of it was from Ontario. The steel was from Ontario. The design came from Ontario designers.
The landfill was from Toronto.
The landfill was from the subway.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, those guys. Anyway, so are we going to see that with the spa? No, I don't think so. They already, they have a program of, an Austrian program, or their program, a national, whatever, their business program of where they source their materials, where their designers come from, where their engineering comes from. They've bought an engineering company. We're not going to see the same made in Ontario product.
In
there.
which case, let me put the question to you.
Sure.
Is Doug Ford trustworthy to protect our crown jewels? Cynthia certainly seems like she is not sold on that.
Yeah, but again, Doug Ford has so many critics, it's not surprising. And unfortunately, as someone with my ideology, I'm quite used to that there's always this mythical thing that we're doing. There's this hidden agenda. It's been going on and on for God knows how many years. The classic example was, if we can divert just for a second, Paul Martin and the Liberals tried to use that argument in 2004. It worked, but they held a minority government. They tried the same damn thing nearly 2 years later, and it bombed. Why? Because people weren't buying it any longer. The same thing works here. You can say whatever you want about Doug Ford, and you can oppose him in many different ways, and that's fine. We live in a democracy. We believe in intellectual discourse. That's perfectly okay. He is not, as has been said, he is not this monster everyone makes him out to be. In fact, if anything, as I've talked about in previous columns and things that I've discussed, Ford is a mix of a whole different series of things that a lot of modern conservatives don't even necessarily subscribe to, and that's conservatism, populism, retail politics. Now, some of those things obviously exist in all of us, but not in the same thing.
You must wrestle with the amount of public money that's being
Of course I do.
utilized here. This is a huge issue. I mentioned those other companies. Ripley's,
I
Canada's
could-
Wonderland. No matter what the
yeah,
brand
I
is,
could
we would
bo-
all hesitate.
I could bore the heck out of you how much it bothers me, including
It's the
when
first
my
time you
side
mentioned you're
does it.
upset about the public money.
But at the same point, I've always recognized public partnerships as being beneficial in society because it brings the best of both worlds. It brings the ideas that people like myself hold near and dear to their hearts, and it allows the public to have an entree into the decision-making process. Is it perfect?
But we
No.
had no entree into this decision-making process. It was all top-down. It was all, like, we begged.
It was a
Ontario-
fait accompli.
Do you think that's
Ontario
unique in
Place-
politics?
Ontario Place for All begged to have a role in making the decision about what would happen at Ontario Place.
I'm not saying that they shouldn't have opened it up. I agree with you. But at the same time, I'm not surprised because unfortunately, and I think it's more the day and age than anything else, we just sort of assume or know what the other side is going to say. So it's just taking up a lot of time. And time is money. You've got to keep moving forward.
But it is-
Well, maybe we would have had a better outcome if the public had been involved.
And
in that
maybe it would have been the
discussion.
same. We
Because
don't know.
we might have learned that, like, nobody asked for a spa at Ontario Place. People might have asked for more animation, more opportunity to do things. Maybe they wanted the Children's Village back. I bet they did.
Well,
Things
spas have a
like
nice
that.
popularity in Europe. I've been to them. They're perfectly
Oh, I
fine.
have been-
There's nothing wrong with introducing
There's nothing-
international ideas,
Let me ask
which
Greg,
you're opposed to.
if-
It's-
I want to call it a water park. I feel like that hits the middle class more. Middle class.
There
plus
aren't water
They're
parks
sick
in
of their
Austria.
kids. They want to get out of the house in the winter. They want to go to a water park.
If there were
Spa
more-
sounds too elite.
If there were more public involvement in this, would we be putting a big spa on the waterfront?
No, I don't think so. And that is part of the problem. And that's going to be part of the judgment. If this is an economic stimulus, if this is something, again, if Live Nation knocked on the door and said, hi, we need money to bring more artists in or concerts, then no. We were talking about the arts. Again, for all the money that goes into museums, A ton of music venues have closed in the city of Toronto. A ton of them. I just read the other day, like Elmo Combo's in trouble. We're going to lose a lot of these huge historic venues. And already, even under Olivia Chow's government, we've had the Just for Laughs Festival canceled. We can't get the Taste of Danforth open again. Right. We got a lot of, like, for all that, you know, there's a bit of a left-right divide maybe on the culture that matters to them. We seem to have a split sometimes. A lot of our cultural iconic festivals or places are closing up. So don't they deserve the same kind of public money consideration? I think you got to have the conversation.
Speaking of iconic cultural things in our province, we can listen to you on the radio between what hours in the morning?
5:30 a.m. to 9 a.m.
Boy, you get up early. Good for you. That's Greg Brady, host of Toronto Today on 640. Menon Dworka's here, President, MPD, Culture Consultants. And on the other side of the table, Cynthia Wilkie, member, former co-chair, Ontario Place for All. Michael Taube, you can read him in the National Post, Troy Media, and Looney Politics. Thanks, everybody, for a really solid discussion. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After 15 years at the helm, Green Party leader Mike Schreiner has put issues such as climate change and the environment on the agenda at Queen's Park. The Greens have also broken through, winning seats in Guelph and Kitchener Centre and hoping for more in this election. How's that looking? Well, let's ask Mike Schreiner, who's also running for personal re-election in the riding of Guelph, and it's good to have you back here in that chair.
Hey, Steve, it's always a pleasure to be here at TVO.
You know, as I read the intro, 15 years. You've been leading this party 15 years. I can scarcely believe that. Does it feel like it?
At times, but you know, I still love the job, and I think I still look pretty young and full of energy. I don't know. What do you think?
I think for 55, you're looking just fine.
Well, thanks. I
I'm
appreciate
right about that.
You
aren't
are
I?
right.
55.
Yeah,
okay.
you are right.
Let's start with this. Doug Ford called this election 16 months before he had to. What do you think?
I think it was irresponsible for the premier to call an election at a time when we're facing this tariff threat from Donald Trump. We should be working across party, jurisdictional, and sectoral lines to show strength through unity to push back against Trump's tariffs. Instead, the premier is selfishly called this election to protect his own job and get out ahead of the $8.3 billion Greenbelt scandal.
You can read the polls as well as anybody, and you know that he has been, I'm sure even anecdotally in your travels, you find people saying good things about the way he has stood up to Trump, particularly given what many have observed as a leadership vacuum in Ottawa because of what's going on there. You prepared to give many props for that?
Well, I'm prepared to hold the premier accountable for the cost of living and affordability crisis that we have in Ontario right now. The housing affordability crisis is the worst it's ever been in this province. Our healthcare system is on the verge of collapse. We have students being forced to learn in overcrowded classrooms, and we frankly need to protect Ontario from Doug Ford's attack on our farmland, our wetlands, and the places we love. This election is about Doug Ford's record, and the people of Ontario deserve a fair province, and they're not getting that with the current government.
Some of those things would clearly be his fault. Some of those things would probably not clearly be his fault. I mean, for example, if the price of everything is too high, you know, the price of everything is too high in every country in the world right now. You can't really blame Ford for that, can you?
Well, you can blame the premier for the fact that housing starts are up across Canada, down at historic lows in Ontario. Housing prices are at historic highs in Ontario. Matter of fact, Ontario has some of the highest housing prices anywhere in the world. I keep putting forward solutions like legalizing missing middle and mid-rise housing. The premier says no. Protecting renters. The premier says no. Actually starting to get back into building deeply affordable nonprofit and co-op housing. The premier says no because he's consistently put the interests of wealthy land speculators ahead of everyday people just looking for a home they can afford.
Is there any issue you think he's done a good job on?
Blaming the prime minister for a lot of the problems in Ontario, Steve. And I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that housing is provincial jurisdiction, healthcare, education, those are all provincial jurisdiction, even though the premier's done a good job of blaming the prime minister for those challenges.
Okay, let's ask a little bit about you here because I don't have to tell you, the Green Party has been running candidates in the province of Ontario for I think about 40 years now. And you have never won more than one seat in a general election, although I hasten to add, as you no doubt would, you did pick up a seat in a by-election in Kitchener Centre, about 15 months ago or something like that. I guess people are wondering, when's the Green Party going to make some kind of breakthrough, right? Beyond just one seat here, maybe a second seat. Why hasn't it happened yet?
Well, you know, it's happened in other provinces and it will happen in Ontario. I mean, the Greens have been the official opposition in PEI, currently hold the balance of power in British Columbia and have done that in the past. You know what? We're the only party that's doubled our caucus since the last election.
That's very cute,
Mr.
Mr. Schreiner.
In Kitchener
Yes.
Center.
You went from one
one
to
to
two.
two. Yeah, and
That's a
you know
doubling.
what?
Yeah.
People said that a Green would never be elected in Ontario, and then a Green was elected. People said, oh, you know, you're not going to elect a second. Now we have two. We came very close in Parry Sound Muskoka in the last election. We're running strong local champions, proven local leaders in ridings across the province, and especially in places like Wellington and Halton Hills, where we have Councillor Bronwyn Wilton running, Dufferin Caledon, former mayor of Orangeville, Sandy Brown running, Bruce Gray Owen Sound, Councillor Joe Lougheed running, and Matt Richter, who almost won last time, is running again this time in Parry Sound Muskoka. So we're excited and optimistic about our opportunity to grow the Green Caucus.
I appreciate the enthusiasm, and I don't want to burst your bubble, but Matt Richter last time came second, running in a seat that did not have a former sitting member. It was an open seat. Now he's running against a cabinet minister who's reasonably popular. You still think he's got a shot to win that seat?
Absolutely. All of our numbers show that. And Steve, I know there's a lot of snow up in the Parry Sound Muskoka region right now, but go up and look at how many Matt Richter signs you see out there. 400 or 500 volunteers every day out knocking on doors. There is a ton of enthusiasm, and part of it is people are feeling abandoned by the Ford government's focus on Toronto. People in Parry Sound Muskoka are saying, why is he spending $2.2 billion on a mega spot on Toronto's waterfront? Why is he spending tens of billions of dollars putting a tunnel under the 401? Why is he spending $50 million ripping up bike lanes in Toronto, or 10 to 12 billion building Highway 413, when we're struggling in Parry Sound Muskoka to keep our roads and bridges open, to ensure people have access to health care? Our children are learning in overcrowded classrooms, and so many people in the riding can't afford a home. Why isn't the Premier focused on those issues instead of things in Toronto that people in Toronto don't even want?
Okay, let's talk about, because you did a big platform drop today, so let's dive in on some of the issues. And Nick Nanos, who put out something the other day, suggested healthcare is the number one issue in this campaign right now. Beyond the tariffs, actually. Healthcare number one. What's the biggest change you'd like to see in healthcare in Ontario?
That Ontario no longer is last in per capita funding for healthcare, and that we invest in the people who deliver that care. The biggest challenges we're facing, whether it's hospitals, access to primary care, long-term care, community and home care, is the fact that the Ford government's wage restraint legislation led to many people leaving the profession, nurses, PSWs, other frontline healthcare workers. They felt disrespected, overworked, underpaid. We have to fix that. If we don't care for the people who care for us, we're not going to fix a healthcare crisis. It starts with primary care, but it flows out to all sectors of our healthcare system.
The other parties have had a lot to say about how to get more family doctors in the province of Ontario. What's your take on that?
You know, the biggest thing is we have to recruit and retain family doctors. And when I talk to family doctors, one of their biggest barriers is the administrative burden. I was just meeting with some family medicine students the other day and asked, how many of you are actually going to go into primary care? Less than half of them raised their hand.
Because they want to be specialists.
Well, no, actually, a lot of them said because the administrative burden as a primary care doctor is so high, we don't get paid for it. So let's not only expand the number of family doctors, but let's put that in team-based care. Let's have nurse practitioners and other healthcare providers operate at their full scope of practice. Let's reduce the administrative burden on family doctors so we can roll that out across the province and ensure everyone is connected to a family doctor, nurse practitioner, primary health care clinic. That will take pressure off of our hospitals, our home and community care system, and our long-term care system.
What is the biggest issue in education today you would like to see tackled?
Reversing the Ford government's $1,500 per student cut to education. That is why you're seeing overcrowded classrooms. That's why you're seeing a lack of educational assistants and other support workers. And sadly, Steve, we're seeing an increasing level of violence in schools, partly because students don't have enough caring adults in those schools. We have to stop saying that the solution to that is for teachers and educators to wear Kevlar, and we have to say the solution is actually investing in more caring adults to teach our children in classrooms that are not overcrowded.
Let me just figure out how you want to pay for all this, because if we're spending $80 billion in healthcare right now, and you say we need to spend more, And you're talking about making up a $1,500 per pupil spending gap in education, so that will cost billions more.
Yep.
Where do we find that money?
Yeah, well, Steve, part of it is let's reverse some of the revenue tools that Doug Ford's taken away. I'm the only MPP in the legislature that said we shouldn't get rid of these license stickers. That is well over $1 billion every year drained from Ontario's treasury. We should stop subsidizing electricity prices for people with 6- and 7-figure incomes. That costs over $7 billion that could be invested in healthcare and education. And we have to bring more fairness to our tax systems. We're going to be asking the wealthy to pay a bit more in Ontario so we can make the investments we need in our public services so people have homes they can afford, access to healthcare, and our children are learning in classrooms that are not overcrowded.
Would you have done the $200 sending a check out to all taxpayers?
Absolutely not.
You would not have done that.
You know what I think is so unfair to Ontarians is millionaires and billionaires like Galen Weston got those $200 checks. The very same person who's gouging people at the grocery store. And I'm thinking, how is this fair for the 81,000 people who are experiencing homelessness right now in Ontario? How is this fair for the 70,000 young people who are on a wait list for autism services, or the 30,000 children on a wait list for mental health services? Let's invest in the people of this province instead of election gimmicks.
Let's do something on housing here. One of your party's first campaign announcements was unveiling a housing plan that would remove the land transfer tax for first-time home buyers, and you already mentioned allowing fourplexes across the province. How would you, I mean, the current government is against that. How would you implement that?
Yeah, well, we would just pass my bill that would legalize fourplexes and four-story as of right in the province and legalize missing middle housing in large urban areas. The provincial portion of land transfer tax takes legislation to change that. We would remove development charges also for homes under 2,000 square feet built within existing urban boundaries. So we incentivize the building of starter homes without paving over our farmlands, forests, wetlands, green space, green belt. And we would replace that money with an affordable communities fund to fund infrastructure in municipalities. Those changes can save first-time homebuyers up to $150,000 on their house. Those are real savings at a time when we need to have generational fairness. A whole generation of young people are wondering if they'll ever be able to own a home. We have a whole generation of seniors wanting to downsize and can't afford to downsize because they can't find a home in the community they live in. We have to fix this. Ontario Greens will get the job done.
This is a tough tightrope to walk because on the one hand, yes, you want to get housing prices down so that people who are not in the market can get in. On the other hand, people who are in the market and have homes do not want to see prices come down because in many cases, you know, their home is their pension or their, you know, this is their future income. How do you walk that tightrope and satisfy everybody?
Well, see, there are a lot of parents like myself who have a 25-year-old living at home wondering if they'll ever be able to afford a home. I want her to be able to afford a home. That's why we're talking about creating more housing choices and options. Right now, you know, too many people have to choose between, you know, a tall condo building or low-density single-family sprawl and long, expensive commutes. That is why we're saying, let's build fourplexes. Let's build 6 to 11-story along major transportation corridors and large urban centers. Let's create more housing types and options for people to make housing more affordable, because that's what generational fairness looks like.
Your party, I know you certainly started as an environmental party that concerned about climate change and the future of the planet. You've obviously branched out to cover, well, you've got a position on pretty much everything nowadays. I guess I'm wondering that the difficulty is, again, if you go back to the pollsters, they will tell you that all of the issues that are sort of 1 to 8 right now are not necessarily the issues that the Green Party is perhaps best associated with. You're best associated with climate change, global warming, democratic reform, the environment. Those are well down the chart right now. So how do you break through on the issues that are kind of 1, 2, 3 right now?
Yeah, we're laser focused on affordability and connecting affordability to climate. So for example, if we build homes that people can afford in the communities they know and love without long commutes, that reduces transportation emissions and it helps protect the environment that protects us. If we help people save money by saving energy, we have a plan to provide households with incomes under $100,000 a free electric heat and cooling pump. That will save them up to 13% on their energy bills. We have rebates for electric vehicles. If you have a heat pump in an electric vehicle, you can save between $500 and $777 a month. Our plan helps people afford things that will help lower their costs. And that's how you meet people where they're at, while at the same time lowering climate pollution.
I don't like to talk strategy too much with the leaders because, of course, you're focused on policies and issues. But the fact is this campaign's almost half over, and the polls haven't budged at all. And I know that polls are a reflection of what people thought yesterday, not an indication of what they might do 2 weeks from now. But I wonder how frustrated you are that this election, having been called in the dead of winter, means people may not be paying as much attention as they otherwise might be. And how do you break through?
Yeah, well, you know what, Steve, as you know, polls, especially provincial polls, look at the province as a whole. They oftentimes don't dig down in deeply into individual ridings. And in the ridings we're targeting, we're very confident with the numbers we're seeing and the just enthusiasm and volunteers we're seeing in places like Parry Sound, Muskoka, Wellington, Halton Hills, Bruce Grey Sound, Dufferin-Caledon, my re-election in Guelph, and Ashland's in Kitchener Centre. And so that's not always reflected in the provincial-wide polls. And so, as you know, voters are going to decide. You can start voting right now if you want. Go to the returning office. But, on February 27th, voters will make their decision. There's still 2 weeks left in this campaign. There's two provincial leaders debates. And, a lot can happen, as you know, in 2 weeks in politics.
Of course. But how do you explain the fact that the Premier's party at the moment, by every poll I've seen, he's in a very strong first place position? If he's as bad as you say he is, explain how that's possible.
Yeah, I think the Premier has effectively put the blame of many of people's frustrations and challenges at the doorstep of the federal government, even though almost all of those are provincial jurisdiction and really rest with decisions the Ford government has made. It's my job as an opposition leader to take that message to the people of this province and to offer the kinds of solutions the Greens are putting forward on housing, healthcare, education, protecting the environment and the places we love in this province.
Okay, let me raise something with you here that I'm not advocating. I'm just asking a question about, but I wrote a column about this several months ago and it got a lot of feedback, and so I want to put it to you. You know that there is no government ever in this province that is elected with more than half the votes. They always, because of our first past the post system, get elected with less than half the votes. If you and the Liberals and the New Democrats had some kind of non-aggression pact in which you kind of divvied up the provincial map and said, oh, we're strong here, so we're going to put our candidate here, and you guys don't run. And you're strong over here, so we won't run a candidate here. In other words, if you stopped splitting the progressive vote three ways, you could defeat this government. Why don't you do that?
Well, first of all, Ontario Greens, we run candidates in every riding. And at the same time, we're open to working across party lines with the other parties. But, it takes two or three to tango. And I will tell you, and I've been very open and transparent with folks about the ridings we're focused in on. I think I've rattled them off a few times here today. And, the other parties are going to make the decisions that they make.
No, I understand that. But did you ever go to either of the other two Progressive Party leaders and say to them, we need to do business differently here, or Ford's going to win again? Did you have that conversation with anyone?
I've publicly said on many occasions that I'm open to figuring out ways the progressive parties can work together.
Does that include strategically?
I'm open to those kinds of conversations. What I know right now is we're laser focused on increasing the Green Caucus, and we know that we have great opportunities in Parry Sound, Muskoka, Wellington, Halton Hills, Dufferin-Caledon, Bruce Grey Sound, re-election.
You'd have a better shot if you could convince Liberals and New Democrats not to run in those ridings.
Yeah,
did you have that conversation?
Those are decisions they'll have to make, Steve.
I know, but have you had that? Did you ask them not to run candidates there, and in exchange, you wouldn't run candidates somewhere else?
I'm not going to ask another party to do things that may or may not be in their interest. But I have been clear, Ontario Greens are willing to work across party lines to put people first.
I do get that. and I don't mean to beat a dead horse
No, it's
here,
okay,
but
Steve.
I just hear, we are going to have all three opposition leaders on this program. And all three of them are all going to say, we're a better option than Ford. And you're all going to split the, whatever it is, 55% of the vote that he doesn't get, which means he wins in a first-past-the-post system. So again, not advocating, but just wondering why you guys are banging your heads against the wall the same way, election after election after election, and expecting a different outcome.
Well, I would say, why don't we change the voting system to make it more democratic and have proportional representation so the legislature actually represents the democratic will of the people of this province, which we don't have right now. It's unfortunate that the Prime Minister promised that in 2015, failed to deliver on it. I think Canadian democracy would be stronger. And especially at this time when you're seeing threats to democracy emerging, especially south of the border, but around the world, I think we need to take action to strengthen our democracy, and improving our voting system is one way we could do that.
Thank you for humoring me on all those policies, all those questions about strategy. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Mike Schreiner, as I will say to all the leaders who come here, be safe on the campaign trail. We wish you well on Election Day, and thanks for spending some time with us at TVO tonight.
Hey, my pleasure. And I bought new snow boots for this campaign, so I'm good to go.
You're going to need them, that's for sure. If you were to go down to the Ontario legislature today and look at the chamber filled with 124 MPPs, you would find that 27 of them are people of color. If you did that 4 decades ago, it would be a very different scenario. You would see precisely one person of color. His name was Alvin Curling, and we're going to tell his story today. Alvin Curling was appointed by Premier David Peterson as the Minister of Housing. He became the first black cabinet minister in Ontario history. And one of the things that the Liberals, with the support of the NDP, had pledged to do was to really ramp up the construction of social housing, and that was the ball that Alvin Curling was going to have to try to take down the field. Well, it was tough. He had introduced a new housing policy for the province of Ontario, and there was an opposition MPP for the New Democrats by the name of David Revel. He gets up and he starts really laying into Alvin Curling. You think you guys have any clue about what it takes to get housing built? This is not going to get the job done. This is terrible. Oh boy, David Revel just went after him over and over and over. It was a brutal question period. I go and talk to David Revel after question period's over. I'm a reporter. I got my microphone, my camera, and I say, really, David, this policy is as terrible as you say it is? And he goes through his speech again, chapter and verse of why this Alvin Curling housing policy is going to be so terrible. Then I turn the camera off and I look at him and I say, wow, it's really that bad, eh? And he says to me, nah, I think it's probably going to be okay. It was a good lesson for me in learning if you're the government, you propose, and if you're the opposition, you oppose, even if you think it's good policy. All of this contributed to a really tough first year for Alvin Curling. And I remember him telling me many years after the fact that he used to show up at Queen's Park every day with a throbbing headache. And he had that throbbing headache because he just felt so much pressure, not only to do a good job, but he felt the pressure of being the only guy in that legislature who was representing an entire community. So he felt that pressure every day when he went to Queen's Park. It's tough. Okay, let's fast forward for a little bit here. 1990, the Liberals lose the election. The NDP comes in. They're in power for 5 years. Then they lose the 1995 election. And we usher in a common sense revolution in the province of Ontario. It's Mike Harris and the Progressive Conservatives who are now in power.
Help make Ontario great again. Join the common sense revolution.
And Mike Harris decides fairly early on in his tenure that he's going to introduce something called an omnibus bill. Basically, it's a bill into which governments throw everything, including the kitchen sink. Now, the opposition Liberals were not happy with this approach, and they wanted to stall this omnibus bill from passing. And so that's what they had Alvin Curling do. He got up, and he stood in his place, and he started to speak against the bill. This filibuster continued for 18 straight hours. He couldn't stop. Once he stops talking, once he sits down, his filibuster is over, and the government can call a vote and bring in the bill. So you may ask yourself, How exactly did Alvin Curling, am I allowed to say, like, how did he do his business?
You could perhaps make it a little more dignified.
More dignified? How did he relieve himself into a dignified vessel in the middle of this filibuster? Well, necessity being the mother of invention, they figured it out. Somebody in the Liberal caucus brought a huge blanket, and a whole host of the MPPs from the Liberal caucus held this blanket up. He did his business in a dignified way, and on he goes. Now, there came a point where the sergeant at arms wanted to throw Alvin Curling out of the legislature for this filibuster. You can imagine how this would have looked. The sergeant at arms putting his hands on a black man, one of the very few people of color in the legislature at that time, and forcibly ejecting him from the legislature. Not a good look, and everybody knew it. And so, when the sergeant at arms came towards Curling for the purposes of taking him out, many of the members of the Liberal caucus literally formed a human shield in front of him, and the sergeant at arms, I think, appropriately decided not to push matters and backed off. Now, eventually the filibuster came to an end. The Conservatives did get their bill through. They got their policies through. They served 2 terms, yada, yada, yada. On we go. But on that day, Alvin Curling was a hero to the opposition because he stopped in its tracks and forced further debate on a bill that a lot of Ontarians had a problem with and thought was against the spirit of democracy. Alvin Curling went on to have a successful career in diplomacy. He became Canada's ambassador to the Dominican Republic. He's always been a kind of an elder statesman in both the federal and provincial Liberal parties, and no doubt in this province there are communities that have been built. There are homes that have been built thanks to the policies that the Liberal government, with Alvin Curling as the Minister of Housing, brought forward nearly 4 decades ago. And that is the agenda for Wednesday, February 12, 2025. Tomorrow we'll hear from a group of teenagers to find out how they intend to make their voices heard during this election campaign. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.